Today's program is KSMU, but we're featuring Mike Smith and Randy Stewart.
Welcome. Music Monday of the Ozarks. Don't forget to check out the website, musicmondayoftheozarks.com. And we are an ORG too. We are an ORG, but there is an ORG. And our Facebook page, Music Monday of the Ozarks Facebook page. We're working on those things too. I think it's a work in progress. I'm Mike Smith here with my longtime coworker Randy Stewart. I'm going to start off by giving you a quick early history of what we know about the KSMU building, and then Randy's going to tell you about his self and his career there. I'll do the same, and then we'll go back and forth about some things we have seen and done and been a part of at KSMU. The building on the corner of the southwest corner of Grand and National. The white stucco building. We have photographs of it here, and it was built sometime in the 1920s. And
before we go too much farther.
Careful, Randy. Ah, yes. Thank you. Blink.
There you go.
We are on the air. Thank you for remembering that.
That was rescued by Mike from the old building right before the wrecking ball came through.
Yeah, that's the original on-air light over the KSMU newsroom door. What became the KSMU newsroom door, and before they tore the building down, I got it. The building itself, again, sometime in the 1920s, and I do know that in the 1950s, a fellow named Lou Black owned the building as his house, and Lou Black was a big mover and shaker in the Ozark Jubilee and was Brenda Lee's manager when she was living here, and he lived there for a long time. I had friends of mine and listeners when I started Seldom Heard Music that had come in and said that Red Foley bounced him on his knee up there when he was a child. This one listener that came in and talked about the parties that they would have up there. The building was also an antique store that someone owned, so private homes, commercial, non-commercial businesses there. It saw its wear and tear. We'll say that. A lot of weather came into the building on a regular basis.
Shouldn't have come in. Yes.
Yeah, that kind of thing. And finally, in 1999-2000, it was torn down. And we are now located in Strong Hall at Missouri State University, where we've been since about the year 2000.
1999.
Yeah. The station went on the air in 1974, May 8th.
May 7th.
May 7th, 1974. And some of the paperwork that first started that, we have
over here.
There's a little Sandra House and Dwayne Meyer, is it?
Yeah.
A picture of them and a little information about some $10,000 grant that was given to the station to help fund it in 1973. And then committees started meeting, and folks got together and decided that they wanted a radio station. Among those that were on those early committees that helped form KSMU, Pearson Ward, who formerly was with the Y and Channel 3, I think, for a while too.
Yeah, he was.
Bob Gilmore, may he rest in peace. What a grand fellow Mr. Bob Gilmore was. And believe it or not, Mr. John Ashcroft was also on our first committee to form KSMU.
Well, that's when he was still a history professor.
When he was a professor at Missouri State University. And thank you, Dwayne Meyer, for being the president at the time that we were on. We went on the air. And thank you to Cliff House, Sandra House's husband, who wired our radio station and with some help from some other folks
Right.
too in those early days. So Cliff House, thank you very much for wiring us up at that house in Grand and National. Now, that takes us to sometime in the mid-'70s where Randy Stewart showed up and worked at KSMU in 1976.
Right.
So he can probably tell you about the days at KSMU at that time.
Well, actually, I can back up a little bit, too. When we started on May 7th of '74, it was a 4 to 10 p.m. weekday schedule. They weren't on Saturdays or Sundays. They had no NPR programming because they didn't have enough full-time staff to qualify, nor were they on the air 18 hours a day, which was another qualification that you had to meet to get federal money, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and thus NPR membership. But they did finally join NPR by August of that year. They managed to, because at first it was just a full-time manager, Wayne C. Patterson, who Haven will remember quite well, and a secretary, Karen Snyder. And then I wasn't there yet, a part-time, I was listening to it though, I did listen to it as a junior in high school and a senior, a part-time student staff of 8. And then they finally managed to hire a full-time engineer and a full-time news director and so on, and they got themselves up to the 6 full-time staff members. Well, when I got there, actually the student staff at that time, there was actually a public radio station at Buffalo High School, KBFL, and quite a few of the students that worked at KSMU came through KBFL. And by the time I was there, the station had been on the air about 2.5 years, and I came through the radio production class taught by Wayne C. Patterson. And he immediately saw, I had gotten interested because of friends of mine gotten interested in opera and classical music in high school. So I made sure that he knew that because I was kind of trolling for a job, and I knew that he was picking people out of the class that he taught that semester. So that's basically how I got in November of 1976.
And
Things really hadn't changed all that much at that point either.
Tell about the news director at the time.
He wasn't there. Haven was already there by that point.
Well, before you.
Before Haven, the first news editor of the station, and there were reminders of him all over the place in the old building. His name was Carl Powers, and he had been born with glaucoma. He was legally blind, and in the office that I eventually took over, there were hundreds and hundreds of Braille scripts, news scripts that he used. Remember those?
Yeah, and the cart machines, all you who know about carts, the tabs on them, the identifiers, labels on them were in Braille.
Yes.
As well. So we had a Braille label maker.
Until we bought new carts to go in there.
Right. So that was kind of interesting. I thought, because I showed up, the fellow was gone. What are all these carts here with Braille? So anyway, that's Randy's introduction.
Right.
And by the way, Randy, throughout his junior high school, I don't know when he started enjoying classical music and opera, but it has become his life's following, his life's interest is opera and classical music, and so a natural fit for Randy to show up and work at a station like ours, there. So I showed up in very late '79, the beginning, I applied for a job in late '79, and Haven Miller here didn't hire me on my first month, so that's okay. I went back, and I saw where they had in the Nile News, the little Nile Green newspaper, or a sheet of paper for news. They were advertising for a student announcer. I had just got out of the Navy fairly recently. Well, in '77 I got out, but I
barely had your land legs back.
had my land legs back. I was served in the United States Navy as a submariner, and I liked that a lot. But before that, I started in radio at KSMO in Salem, Missouri. I was in high school. And 1971, a buddy of mine was working there, and I started hanging around, then I started working. And after I did a couple of years of junior college, I also went back to KSMU, KSMO in Salem. I became a 19-year-old news director at a real small town radio station. KETU was another call letter that I first went to before I went to KSMO. ETU was an FM station, and KSMO an AM station at 1340 on your radio dial. And worked there for a little while. Then I went into the Navy, and then I came out and didn't do much for a little while, and then came to Missouri State University on the GI Bill, saw this ad in the Nile News, and applied. And the second time was the charm. I think you were already filled up, Haven. And then I already had my radio legs and my land legs back. So taking some of those responsibilities early on as a student, and Arlen Diamond saw something in me that he offered me a job full time and hired me to acquire, train, schedule student staff.
Cajole, bully at times.
Yeah. So thanks to Arlen and Bob Gilmore and some other great people that saw something to hire me for, I did, and whipped these kids into shape,
Yeah,
basically.
almost literally.
And we, at the time, Randy said we were off the air at 10 p.m., and we would shut the transmitter off.
Well, by the time you got there, we were off at midnight.
Midnight.
Yeah.
We would shut the transmitter off, even though we were licensed for 24 hours. And as anyone who knows anything about radio transmitters knows, it's very hard on the equipment to turn them on and off. You go in every morning and slam 6,000 watts in or volts in, and so we, as Arlen said, we kept our fingers crossed every night that it would come
back on the next
morning. And so it's much easier to keep a transmitter on solid for years and years than it is to turn it off even once. So I was hired basically to staff the station 24/7, and I used the students who were interns, who were paid, some volunteers, and we staffed from 6 to 9 p.m., 9 to midnight, midnight to 3, and a new person would come in 3 to 6. So these people would do 3-hour shifts each, and I had up to 23, 25 student announcers on a couple of those semesters back then, before automation came into the forefront.
That's right. I'd like to back up a little bit about my, I started, of course, as a student announcer like Mike did, and I only remained a student for a little over, no, not even 2 years, about a year and a half, and the rather flighty little music director at the time, Jennifer Bryant, decided to run off to California with a bunch of her friends. And so Wayne C. Patterson plugged me in. I'd been doing, I'd actually been programming music shows for quite some time. They began to trust me with more and more of them. And so I got plugged into that job basically in March of 1978. In the summer or actually by the end of the semester, Wayne Patterson was gone. They did not renew his contract. Now it's interesting, no one's ever really said why. I think he and Bill Curry at Channel 21 blew up the transmitter that spring, and that may have had something to do with it, but maybe. But I have to say, this is one feather that we can't put in Arlen's cap, because this happened before he got there. In the spring 1978 Arbitron survey, the ratings survey, KSMU was the most listened to intermediate market public radio station in the country, with all of 7,500 weekly listeners. And that sounds pretty paltry, but that still put us in the top 20 of all 190 NPR stations across the country, regardless of market size. And that happened during Wayne Patterson's watch. I don't know I can't say what he actually did to help that happen, but, but it happened when he was there. But once Arlen got there, of course, we really started growing and by leaps and bounds. And you came when? July of that? It was the middle of the summer.
I think August 15th of 78.
Okay, August 15th is the official start date for Arlen. But right now, I'm the senior person by about three. Well, I can't say that anymore because you're retired. But I was always the senior person by 3 months.
In seniority, well, time seniority, you always have been.
Yeah.
Since I,
Yeah,
absolutely.
right. Because I started in
Yeah.
November of '76.
You all know, some of you know Earl Holmer. He helped train me when I started, and I'm surprised he isn't here. He's sometimes at these things
Yeah.
today, so it would have been good to see him.
Yeah, Nancy's. Yeah.
Yeah. Randy talked about Arlen taking over, and when that happened, we started, our technical abilities increased. At the time, we were receiving signals from NPR and APR. How?
Over a 5 kilohertz AT&T landline, just like every other radio network was operated at the time. The very first all-satellite radio network was Mutual. I think they went satellite in either I think they went in 1979. But
Yeah.
NPR was the second to go to all-satellite distribution. What that meant was multiple channels of programming, stereo, high-fidelity sound, which we had never had from network shows before.
Mm-hmm. And we were transferring these to reel-to-reel
Right,
machines.
time shifting.
The signal went into the reel-to-reel in an analog setting.
Mm-hmm.
And all these programs that we mainly classical, and we started doing jazz as
We had
well.
actually done jazz. They had done jazz all the way from the beginning of the
Mm-hmm.
station. They did a half-hour block Monday through Friday at noon, and an hour-long block from like 9 to 10 p.m. or 11 to midnight
Yeah,
or whatever.
locally produced.
Yeah, locally
and
produced.
then we started receiving those shows on the satellite as well.
Yes.
And at one point in our
Well, folk programming, bluegrass programming, all
Yeah.
kinds of things.
that we started in Arlen, and our chief engineer, Doug Waugh, were hot on fidelity, quality of our signals. So we
It made sense. We were primarily
Yeah.
classical music. It
playing
made sense
classical
to have,
music.
yeah.
We started thinking about the quality of that radio signal, and Doug Waugh, our chief engineer, we purchased a Sony PCM pulse code modulator.
Yeah.
And ran our signal from the satellite into a beta tape, a beta TV tape, and we processed it digitally with the Sony PCM.
Not the old
And,
PCM 1630.
Yeah.
A lot of you guys probably got.
So that's how we were able to digitally get ours. We were the very first station here, and we know in Missouri too, to be experimenting in such a way. And we also, with our signal, our processing, our signal, our compression and expansion of the band 91.1, and our limiting, we limited our limiting.
Trying to get away with as little as possible.
Yeah, we opened up that band to as much high fidelity as we could. We did not compress. We did not, we as little as possible to keep our signal as clear as it could be. And we also, KSMU was the first radio station in the 5-state region for sure, with the exception of the city of Chicago. We were the first radio station to play compact discs on the air, commercial or non-commercial radio in St. Louis, Kansas City. Springfield KSMU was the first radio station in Missouri to play on the air compact discs.
And part of the reason for that was that some of you have been here long enough to remember the old House of Sound out on the Brentwood Shopping Center. back in the day when there actually was you actually could go into someplace besides a Best Buy and look for stereo equipment. They got the first CD players in Springfield, and starting in September of '83, they gave us a loaner, this clunky old Sony CD player. It's the CDP 1000, the very first CD player Sony ever built. It was a piece of junk that sold for $1,000 at the time. And I can call it a piece of junk because I had to operate it. But they gave us that as a loaner to use. They were the first store to receive CD players for sale. In fact, they sold the first CD player that they ever sold based on the fact that we were playing CDs on the air. We were doing like a monthly demo, I guess, or maybe every other week. But we did, in fact, have the only operating CD player in Springfield for at least a month in the
Even private ownership, we're talking.
yeah, exactly. In the fall of '83,
Yeah.
right as they were hitting the market.
We also, KSMU was the first radio station in the United States to acquire and broadcast pre-recorded digital audio tapes. A company called Capriccio out of, where were they, Chicago also?
I think they were in Chicago.
And they informed us that we were the first radio station to order their
product.
Their product. And the machines that we played them on were acquired from Japan in the middle of the embargo. Do you remember the embargo that we had going on with Japan in the 1980s? And getting a hold of electronic goods was almost impossible. I don't know how you did it, Arlen. I don't know how Doug did it. But
He tells no tales.
But we got this machine, at least one machine I know of, but it was a Sony machine, Sony digital audio tape machine, the little square tapes. And not only did we record our satellite feeds onto that and play them back, but we had those pre-recorded ones that we did.
And we did local production on them too.
And local production, what we did. But all the instructions were all in Japanese. All the paperwork was in Japanese, which didn't matter to Doug, our chief engineer. He could do anything. And
there was no internet to look up the instruction manual in English at that point.
Nothing like that. And the voltage for that Japanese unit was made for Japanese voltage. I think it's 100.
50 hertz, 100,
100 volts, right.
Yeah.
So Doug built a transformer to hook up the digital audio tape to
60 cycle,
so
120.
Yeah, so we wouldn't burn the thing up, trying to play Beethoven or something.
Right.
And so that's some of the things that we've done to bring the high fidelity to our audience. We had and we still have a great signal. When you listen to some other station, you can hear that hiss in the background, that limiting, that compression that they do. You turn us on, and it's pretty much silent. We fill our band with our great music and great talk format that we have. We were going to talk about, among the other firsts, I'll just bring this up real quick, the firsts of the DATs, the beta production there, in the summer, in August of the year 2000, so this is the 16th anniversary for that, I was able to acquire, and there's Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? There's a Dapper Dan Can CD here on the table. You're welcome to look at it.
Yeah, right there.
And there's also fans, please take one. I'm a seldom heard music fan. Bluegrass show that I started producing in 1982. And as many of these as we can, there's about 25 of these, so grab one if you don't have one already.
But the CD, we're the first station in the country to be serviced by that.
Yes, I'm the first
record label.
station in the country to actually play cuts from Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? On Seldom Heard Music, a Saturday night in August of 2000. I acquired a CD of the soundtrack from our co-worker at the time, Missy Shelton, who was working as our Capitol reporter and general reporter at the time. And she had gone to France and saw Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? In July, I believe it was, of 2000. It was released, the film and the CD was released in Europe before it was released here. And Missy brought back a CD of Oh Brother, Where Art Thou and said, "You're going to love this." She's from Tennessee, and she knew I would, and
Yes,
I did.
yes.
So I put it on the air, made an announcement of that fact that this is the first time that you're going to hear this, folks, and I think it's going to be something. And it turns out it did become
Yeah.
something. I got on at that time, IBMA. I'm a member of the International Bluegrass Music Association. They were in there sometime, the early years, and we got on a chat room on the, at the time, a chat room, bluegrass chat room, and I found out that, yes, I was the first broadcaster in the country to put it on the air. And the radio company, Mercury Records, sent me a Dapper Dan can CD. Yeah, of that. Sorry, Randy. And
That's it.
yeah,
It's a great little.
it's really cool. It's all signed by the folks, and sent me up to down from the mountain concert in Kansas City, and I got to sit in Ralph Stanley's seats and go backstage and do a bunch of stuff. But I'm very proud that the first audience to hear "Oh Brother, Where Art Thou" on radio was ours. Yeah. So that was kind of cool. Another first that we're involved in at KSMU.
We were also, I think, one of the first stations in the country to tell the Metropolitan Opera to what they could go do with themselves. I call this the Great Met Opera kerfuffle. I know this ain't an opera crowd, but this story illustrates, really what we as a station had to go through to bring a variety of different kinds of programming to the area. I can give you a brief little history. The Saturday afternoon Metropolitan Opera matinee performances have been broadcast out of New York since 1931. For the first 30 years, they were carried on one of all three major networks, NBC, ABC, or CBS. But of course, by the early 60s, radio was changing, more emphasis on local DJs playing top 40 hits, local talk programming, and so on. So the Met formed its own network, its own ad hoc network every year for their 20 broadcasts on Saturday afternoons from December to April. And that's how they've operated ever since, actually. Starting in '80, the Met broadcasts were available for the first time in stereo to any station in the country over the NPR satellite. Rather than, again, they were fed over AT&T phone lines. When KTXR, they were the original Met station here in town. And prior to that, prior to 1980, I think partly because Ken Meyer was kind of PO'd that the university had started their own radio station, and he felt that we were taking away part of his beautiful music audience from the Gentle Giant. But obviously, KSMU would have been a natural fit for the opera from the very beginning that we came on the air, but Uncle Kenny had the contract. Well, when they switched distribution to the NPR satellite in 1980, Ken didn't want to invest in the satellite receiving equipment, so he canceled his Met contract. I think he was been looking for a way out for some time, but felt trapped. And believe me, the Met could do that to you. But, I'm a big opera fan, and Arlen knew it, and so he jumped at the chance for KSMU to pick up the Met, at least for a while anyway. But there are some things you need to know about the Met broadcast. They always required live transmission. You could do no tape delay unless you were in Alaska or Hawaii or like the U.S. Virgin Islands or something where you couldn't get it any other way. Now, the nominal start time for those afternoon matinee performances was 2 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Central. But if they did a long Wagner opera or something, they would start a half hour earlier or an hour earlier or an hour and a half earlier. That's because the Met does 2 shows on Saturdays. They do the matinee performance of one opera, then at 8 p.m. that night, they do another opera, completely different set, completely different cast, everything. So on those Saturdays, stagehands have to disassemble the sets for the afternoon show, build the sets for the evening show before it goes on. So it ain't all about the radio network and its stations. The stations that carry the Met are just eavesdropping on whatever the Met's doing for their paying crowd in the Metropolitan Opera House. Now, starting in 1987, we had picked up a couple of major non-musical shows on KSMU Saturday mornings that have been hugely popular. What Do You Know? And Car Talk. Now, What Do You Know was always fed at 10 a.m. Central, and it was always a live show. And we follow it at noon with Car Talk, which we pre-recorded. Well, of course, it's all pre-recorded now since Tom Magliozzi passed away. But, well, okay, what happened when the Mets matinee started before 1 p.m.?
11:30, let's say.
Yeah, we'd have to,
Well,
we'd be cutting into What Do You Know and probably losing all of Car Talk, preempting all or part of those shows. And those are two shows we were working our butts off to build an audience for. Now, as you can imagine, management wasn't too happy about that situation, but the Met said we had to carry them live or come hell or high water, so we did. Until the fall of 1988. You see, apparently the stagehands at the Met that year had negotiated a new contract. It was too, and I'm sure they're right about this, it was too difficult or even too dangerous to try to reset that huge Met stage in the allotted time between the end of the matinee show and the beginning of the evening performance. So the stagehands union forced the Met to move their Saturday matinee start time back by a half hour, 1:30 Eastern, 12:30 Central. So the Met, that was the nominal start time. Again, if they were doing Wagner, it might start at 11 a.m. Well, that was the deal breaker for us. Well, for Arlen anyway. Even the Met was only on, the Met was only on for 20 weeks out of the year, but he felt that was 20 weeks too many to be messing around with two of our most listened to shows of the whole week. I was music director, but somebody else had the final say as to what we were going to do with that time slot. So when the Met tried to force us to start every week at 12:30, Arlen said, no thank you, and didn't renew the contract. Now, I worked Saturday afternoons live during that period. Actually, I still do. I'm still on Saturday afternoons. Well, it was decided I'd do a 3-hour classical music show from CDs from 1 to 4 p.m. Fine, after Car Talk and then before All Things Considered. Oh, yeah, and by the way, the Met would also frequently eat into the beginning of All Things Considered because the performances would run past 5 p.m. Eastern Time or 4 Central. So, well, from that point on, the Metropolitan Opera Saturday broadcasts have not been heard in the Springfield market. Oh, School of the Ozarks carried them for a while, but eventually they decided to sell their license to Missouri State University, and we started relaying our signal on their frequency. And I think that was only about 2 years later, something like that. Now, that's not the end of the story. When the Met season was supposed to begin on that first Saturday of December of 1988, our listeners heard not the familiar voice of Peter Allen saying, Texaco, your ticket to the Met for 48 years, or however his intro went. They heard my all too familiar voice introducing symphonies and concertos and sonatas. I was the live guy on duty and the only person answering the phone on Saturday afternoon. Well, let's just say I damn near resigned after that first Saturday of putting up with angry, rabid opera fans who felt betrayed, blindsided, deprived, discriminated against.
Just a perfect opera scenario.
Yeah, exactly. Somebody should have written an opera about it. Maybe I should have written an opera about it. I sympathized with them. I would have loved to have kept the Met, but, we had to do what we had to do. Well, I was the one that caught most of the flack from that decision. Although Arlen was not immune, he can tell you that the folks at Springfield Regional Opera circulated a petition denouncing our decision. People packaged up and returned all their KSMU fundraising premiums and sent with snotty notes like, well, so much for alternative programming. And there was a rash of really nasty letters and editorials in the News Leader accusing Arlen of trying to, quote, kill opera. In fact, Bill Tatum, some of you remember him, wrote an article about it in the paper called Opera Buffs Hit Roof with Cancellation. We found all those articles in the scrapbook.
Then Randy got hit internationally.
Yes. Well, not me personally.
We got hit.
The Met themselves got their licks in too. Because one of the main features of the Met broadcast has always been, since they're live, they got to put something on during intermission features, or during the intermissions while they're resetting the stage and everything, is a 20-minute feature called Opera Quiz. At that point, it was Texaco Opera Quiz because they were the sponsor. And they have various celebrities form a panel and they answer trivia questions sent in by listeners. And they do it every week. They still do it, I guess. Well, one week in 1989, one of the panelists was a lady named Allison Ames, who I had run into at some of the public radio music conferences. She was a big publicity person at, Philips, Deutsche Grammophon, Polygram, whatever the heck their corporate structure was at the time. She was also a former Springfield resident. Her father had been the director of the Springfield Art Museum in the 50s and 60s. And she was one of the panelists on Texaco Opera Quiz one week, and she made it a point of going on the air live and tearing us a new one.
Worldwide audience.
Right there on live radio. Yeah, at that point, the Met started getting worldwide distribution too. It's a disgrace that my former hometown of Springfield, Missouri, no longer has a radio station carrying the Met broadcasts. And of course, all the other panelists were harumphing about that. Now, I found out about it because I don't remember if it was Bucky Bowman or somebody called me and said, you need to tune in KCOZ and hear what they're doing on the Opera Quiz. This is before we took over the School of the Ozarks, College of the Ozarks station. They still carried the Met, and Sarah Kleinfelter, their GM, would always really crow about that. In fact, in one of the newspaper articles, she made a big point out of it. Even though she was quoted by Bill Tatum as saying, well, the Met is a real pain from a broadcaster standpoint, but they carried it anyway. The Branson Point Lookout transmitter has always been audible here in Springfield, but pretty noisy. But I wasn't real happy about that. But you know, the funny thing is, a year later, I would say within a year, we started carrying opera on Tuesday nights from CDs. I was hosting, and Jim Billings of
It was
SRO.
simply a choice. What do you know? And Car Talk or the
Met.
And our audience
Was way bigger for the other two shows.
Right.
So we moved opera to Tuesday evening.
Marlon?
Now, let me just add one thing. I think there were two other things that happened.
I may have missed a couple.
Helen Godfrey.
Yes, she was the director of the Texaco Metropolitan Opera Radio Network.
Right, on one break, said something to the effect of, Metropolitan Opera, heard everywhere in the world, except Springfield.
Yes, they did that.
The other thing that happened was when
They took no prisoners.
when a group of opera lovers convened on the station.
Yeah, it wasn't just a petition that they signed.
They were all in the office and hanging out the doors and windows and whatnot.
Yeah.
And David Emanuel, rest his soul, the discussion ended when he said, and by the way, what's this crap that you have on Saturday nights? And I said, these people are not going to entertain some sort of intelligent discussion about why we make decisions.
Obviously not.
And so I said, well, okay, that was when I quit listening.
Yeah. Speaking of KSOZ, College of the Ozarks, they ended up selling us their license and transmitter, selling the university, selling to MSU their license and transmitter for $10?
Yes.
Yeah.
We never actually paid the $10, but that was,
At that time, Jerry,
Another good and valuable consideration.
Yes.
their president, Jerry Davis, was tired of paying the NPR dues, I think. And
They felt like they were losing money. They weren't raising money during fundraising and
Right.
things like that. So.
even though they had a long history of broadcasting and training students.
They came on in 1964, I
Yeah,
believe.
they were on the air. They had a
long before
show.
we were.
They had What Do You Know on their radio station before we had it on ours. My friend Dave Baker asked me to listen to that show and see if we wanted to try to get it on KSMU.
1993.
No, 80.
What do you know?
What do you know,
Yeah,
87?
87.
When you bought
June of 1993 was when we officially took over their license.
Yeah.
the, could have been politics involved there a little bit?
Like what?
Maybe. From Jerry Davis's side, yeah.
Yes,
There's
that's
possibly.
Oh, you mean as far as, yes, okay.
Whether or not he liked public radio.
Programming.
Yeah, that's possible.
That had, yeah.
Yeah.
That was never
Other
one of their stated
transitions-
reasons.
Other transitions in that signal boost, we were originally, 10,000?
No, 5,800 watts effective radiated power.
5,800
yes.
ERP, and then we boosted it to 40 grand, right?
Yeah.
And
That
built
was in 1986.
shot our tower up. We went into West Plains. We went into
Joplin.
We're into Mountain Grove, Missouri, and Neosho.
We're nominally
right
in
now.
Neosho, but it's not, yeah, well.
And our signal is now in northern Arkansas as well.
Because of the Branson transmitter.
Yeah. Can we go into live music since we're
Yes.
Music Monday?
Yes, please.
I started KSMU's Seldom Heard Music Show in 1982, August of 82. So this month I'm celebrating 34 years of that program on the air. It's the longest running bluegrass show. Thank you. It's the longest running bluegrass show in Missouri on the same call letters with the same host. My friend Harry Moore joined me 13 years ago and has been co-host ever since then. I brought in the 80s musicians, the band, the homegrown band. Gary Gallier was my first person I put on live. This is sometime before he took his national championship in Winfield for Mountain Dulcimer.
Right.
He and his brother Les were my very first live music guests. The band Homegrown, I'm surprised D.C. Cunningham isn't here today. The band Homegrown was also up there. I remember in January of 1990, when they went from Desert Shield to Desert Storm, we had told our audience that we would join NPR for their wall-to-wall coverage when Desert Storm happened, when they decided to cross the border and do the, go on the offense. We promised our listeners we'd go on the air with NPR's coverage of the event. Well, that happened on a Saturday night with the Vern Williams Bluegrass Band live in my studio. And getting those people and any musicians live in that studio.
We weren't
was
really set up for it at
something.
the time.
It was a bunch of patch panel stuff and input settings on machines and headphones and all that. Chords everywhere.
Using the record mode in the open reel machines
Yeah,
as,
and the input
as
mode.
headphone amps for the
Yeah.
musicians to listen to themselves.
So here I got this band. They drove here from Bolivar to play, and Kenny was in that. Kenny Key, he was in that, and I had to stop him in the middle of, we ended one of the songs, and I had to apologize and said, we can't go on, we have to go to NPR. So, but other folks that we brought in to not just music and live, and we still have our studio live. We do once a month. We've got some great music for you in the studio live every single month, folks.
Some of you have played that.
But some of the folks we brought in to perform at Missouri State include...
These weren't all in our dinky little studio
No,
that
these
we were
are
trying to
on
use
stage
at the time.
at Carrington Hall. Doc Watson. And I've got the flyer for that Doc Watson performance here on the table. Doc Watson, J.J. Cale, we brought in to Carrington Hall also. I've brought in Norman and Nancy Blake on 2 occasions to perform there. What do you know? 3 times, 4 times? How many?
3 times.
3 times. What do you know? We were What do you know's first or second stop.
We were their very first tour stop, I believe. Outside of Madison, Wisconsin, yeah.
And long friendship with Michael and Arlen developed into a real good, strong personal friendship. Capitol Steps have been here twice.
At least.
Yeah. And speakers including Cokie Roberts, Nina Totenberg, John Hockenberry, Claudio Sanchez, among others, that we have. Bob Edwards, absolutely Bob Edwards.
Well, when he could pause long enough from his cigarette breaks to come in and talk, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, he was a chain smoker.
Oh, God.
That's for sure. So that's just, those are just some of the things, and our format, our musical format that we have, of course. I started Seldom Heard Music in '82, the classical, the jazz, the bluegrass. We've had the Riders in the Sky. We've had Mountain Stage. We've had Journey into Jazz, Ken Nordine's Word Jazz.
We're doing 3 hours of blues on Saturday nights.
Yeah, we were one of the first stations to bring the Grateful Dead's New Year's Eve special our way, to your way.
Yeah.
We had folks that would come and rent hotel rooms with their stereo gear, and because the Grateful Dead network listed us, and the folks that were close enough, Oklahoma, Kansas, whatever, they'd come and rent rooms in the hotels and listen to KSMU's Grateful Dead Hour. And we're doing that. KSMU, Missouri State University, they've had our license. The Board of Regents actually owns our owns our license.
Board of Governors.
Board of Governors, and
Gotta get that
and Missouri
right.
State has given us a home here and helped us bloom and blossom and grow. Absolutely, we wouldn't be here without
Without the
them,
university,
and
that's
we
right.
wouldn't be here without you.
All of you.
And I was going to say the cliche, you are the you in public radio, and for KSMU as well. You know, we're here for you, and thank God you're here for us as well.
Yeah, Robin.
Randy, Mike, I know I speak for everyone in this room and everyone who listens to you, to thank you from the bottom of our hearts for your years and years of service.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Robin. Thank you very much.